is not only our right, it is our power. Use your China holds first security meetings in 4 years. Australia, Philippines celebrate combined patrols in South China Sea. Australia Jinping to visit Russia for summit with Putin. And Biden administration proposes first restriction to migrants. There's a more story. Stay tuned. On politics, on Wednesday, Japan and China have kickstarted their first official security meetings in 4 years, with Chinese officials stating concern over Tokyo's military buildup and Japanese diplomats taking aim at Beijing's close ties with Russia and its alleged use of surveillance balloons. The talks intended at easing tensions commenced in Japanese capital. They come amidst Japan's fears that China may resort to force to take control of Taiwan in the wake of Russia's raid on Ukraine, a step that could lead to a wider conflict involving Tokyo and the United States and interrupt world trade. In December, Japan said it will increase defense spending over the next 5 years to 2% of gross domestic product (GDP), a sum of $320 billion to prevent China from resorting to military action. Tokyo also set to acquire long-range missiles that could strike mainland Japan hosts. Beijing, which added defense spending by 7.1% last year, spends more than 4 times as much as Japan on its armed forces. Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Sun Weidong expressed concern over Japan's changing security posture at the outset of Wednesday's talks. He also warned against Japan's negative moves with regard to Taiwan in collusion with powers outside the region. Japanese Deputy Foreign Minister Shigeru Yamada, on his part, emphasized on concerns over the two neighbors' territorial clash over inhabited islands in the East China Sea, known as exercises with Russia, and the alleged Chinese surveillance balloons seen over Japan's skies at least 3 times since 2019. China has denied the Japanese claims regarding spy balloons, calling them ungroundless. The Japanese claims follow similar allegations by the U.S., which shot down a suspected Chinese surveillance balloon last month. Australia and the Philippines are deliberating the possibility of Philippine vessels saw Beijing's diplomat in Manila summoned by Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Richard Marles, Australian Defense Minister, said on Wednesday that he had deliberated joint patrolling with Philippine Defense Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr. The likelihood of the Philippines and Australia, and amidst a milieu of China's progressively muscular approach in demanding its extensive territorial claims in the contested sea. The Philippine Coast Guard spokesperson on South China Sea, J. Tariela, said on Monday that discussions with the United States have gone beyond the infancy stage and the likelihood of carrying out joint patrols was high. Tariela did not give details on the scale or timing of the proposed patrols, which come after the Pentagon said this month the U.S. and the Philippines had agreed to resume joint maritime patrols in the South China Sea. The idea of Philippine and U.S. Coast Guard deployment in the South China Sea instead of the Navy will mitigate and miscalculation and stop China from finding an excuse to intensify tension in the waterway, Romel George Ong, former vice commander of the Philippine Navy, said on Monday. Manila earlier this month accused China's Coast Guard of targeting a military-grade laser at one of its Coast Guard vessels that was supporting a recent activities in the South China Sea, and President Marcos Jr. summoned the Chinese ambassador to express his serious concern over the harassment of the Philippine Coast Guard vessel. The incident triggered expressions of worry from other countries, including Japan, Australia, and the U.S. China has denied Philippine claims of the incident, which it said did not mirror the truth. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said last week that his country's Coast Guard had acted in a professional and restrained manner towards the Philippine ship. He also accused the Philippines and the U.S. of engaging. China had no legal basis for its territorial claim to almost the whole South China Sea. Wang said China will not be intimidated by the U.S. Moving forward, the Indo-Pacific region is witnessing great power competition between China and the United States, whilst a thirst for has warned. Mike Burgess, the Director General of the Australian Security Intelligence Organization, ASIO, said late Tuesday, Australia now faces extraordinary threats with more Australians, media commentators and journalists, Burgess said, adding that a small number of judicial figures have been subjected to suspicious approaches. Foreign interference operations are also being used to monitor, threaten, and even harm members of diaspora communities, he added. ASIO, he noted, had seen a rise in the online targeting of people working in Australia's defense industry since September 2021, when Joe Biden, US President, the then United Kingdom's Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and former Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced a three-way agreement known as AUKUS to give Australia a fleet of submarines, those with military expertise from traveling overseas, to provide training, but in others, legal ambiguities have impeded law enforcement's ability to intervene. Talking Russia-Ukraine war, according to reports, Xi Jinping, Chinese leader, familiar with the plan. Reports said on Tuesday that the Xi-Putin summit was part of a Chinese attempt to play a more active role in bringing the year-old war to an end and part of a push for multi-party peace talks. China will also use the summit to repeat calls that nuclear weapons should not be used, the report added. Plans for the journey are at an early stage and the timing has not been decided, the report said, adding that his visit might take place in April or in early May when Russia celebrates its World War II victory over Nazi Germany. Wang Yi, China's top diplomat, is presently in Moscow and anticipated settlement to end the war in Ukraine, which started on February 24th last year when Russian forces invaded the country. The administration of United States President Joe Biden has revealed a new rule that could tighten restrictions for tens of thousands of asylum seekers arriving the country's southern border with Mexico. The proposed rule announced on Tuesday will give border officials the power to turn away migrants who circumvent available established pathways to lawful migration or who fail to cease from re-entering the U.S. for 5 years. Labeled as an emergency measure, the proposal proposes the end of Title 42, a controversial policy implemented in 2020 under ex-Republican President Donald Trump that has been used to eject asylum seekers in the name of public health. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, and the Department of Justice, DOJ, in a joint statement on Tuesday, described the proposed policy as a temporary measure designed to address the spike in border crossings from his predecessor's border policies. Critics denounced Tuesday's announcement as a continuation of Trump's approach to immigration and security. Meanwhile, the Biden administration described the policy as an opportunity to incentivize the use of new and existing lawful processes and disincentivize. The rule indicates one of the widest attempts from the Biden administration to restrict undocumented movement across the U.S.-Mexico border and 78,944 encounters in the region. Republicans have pressured Biden to reduce illegal crossings, fearing a surge could overwhelm government resources. The advocates to include Nicaraguans, Haitians, and Cubans as well. That strategy needs asylum seekers from the 4 countries to apply through a parole process that necessitates financially. Up to 30,000 applicants per month will be accepted under the program, the Biden administration said. More stories. 9/11 families not eligible to Afghan bank funds, as U.S. judge says. Family members of victims of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks are not entitled to funds from Afghan Central Bank, a United States judge has ruled. U.S. District Judge George Daniels in the ruling on Tuesday said awarding the families money seized from the Da Afghanistan Bank, DAB, will require an assessment that the Taliban is the legitimate government of Afghanistan, a verdict he was constitutionally restrained from making. The administration of U.S. President Joe Biden in February 2022 issued a controversial executive order stating it will split $7 billion in frozen assets from Afghanistan's central bank between the Afghan people and families of 9/11 victims who sued the Taliban. While the Taliban was not directly involved in the raids, attorneys for the families argued it had assisted in enabling Al-Qaeda, which mounted the attack, by permitting the group to operate in Afghanistan. An Afghan-American activist, Bilal Askara, said, according to report, that at the time of the order, the Afghan people had nothing to do with 9/11 and called the decision a theft of public funds from an impoverished nation. On health matters, the warmer and wetter world created by the climate crisis will drive a rise in mosquito-borne diseases such as malaria and dengue fever. Professionals say that in the Pacific Islands, such predictions are now becoming a reality. Between 2012 and 2021, its Pacific Island members recorded 69 outbreaks of dengue fever, 12 outbreaks of Zika. The ailments, which can sometimes be lethal, are all transmitted by mosquitoes that thrive in warm, humid conditions. Diseases surveillance by the World Health Organization shows that in the Solomon Islands, for example, malaria cases rose by 40% between 2015 and 2021. Papua New Guinea saw numbers of malaria rise by 5% over the same period, with a 25% increase in connected deaths. Zika, which causes a rash, fever, headache, muscle and joints pain, chikungunya, which causes devastating joint pain, and dengue are transmitted by the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which tends to bite during the day. Taking action now is critical, according to Tom Burcott, a professor at the Institute of Tropical Health and Medicine at Australia's James Cook University in Cairns. Vector-borne diseases occur when people are infected by parasites or viruses carried by vectors, which are usually mosquitoes and other blood-sucking insects, and are most dominant in tropical and subtropical parts of the world, where the warm climate provides the ideal conditions for them. Malaria is the leading vector-borne disease of concern. Over 87% of the malaria burden in the Western Pacific in the country's Eastern Highlands province, the health system to react effectively. On weather and climate, historic snowfall on parts of the Midwestern United States this week, with local officials warning of life-threatening travel conditions in areas anticipated to receive blizzard conditions, impacted by potentially dangerous winter weather, projecting heavy snow, sleet, and gusts to last through Thursday. A projected 40 million Americans could be affected by three-day blast. Snow could fall as rapidly as 5 centimeters, 2 inches per hour, the agency warned, as it has expected treacherous, potentially impossible travel conditions and possible power outages. The storm is likely to break records in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area located on the state line between Minnesota and Wisconsin. The cluster of cities, which boasts a total of its highest totals in history. Snowplow crews will be out working statewide, but this storm could be a doozy, the Minnesota Department of Transportation tweeted on Tuesday. In anticipation of the extreme weather, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey announced the city was planning to declare a snow emergency on Wednesday. Public school buildings in the city have been closed through Friday, with students attending class through online e-learning facilities. The winter storm comes as an Arctic air mass moves south from Canada into the U.S., combining with two energetic fronts and pushing eastward. Lastly, on global news, in African scenes, Sudanese protesters take to the streets to dissent junta. On Tuesday, hundreds of Sudanese protesters took to the streets of Khartoum, transfer of power to civilian leaders. Riots, police fired tear gas as protesters, and confrontations took place between security and protesters. Protester Othman Al-Hadi said has been in chaos since an uprising overthrew its long-time autocratic ruler Omar al-Bashir, and Tuesday's demonstration is the newest in a long string of protests. A military coup in October 2021 rudely ended a preceding democratic transition agreement with protest leaders. Earlier, a mistake. In a speech delivered on Sunday, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who leads the country's paramilitary known as the Rapid Support Forces, said he regretted the move. Tuesday's protest was led by the Resistance Committees, a grassroots group that has steadfastly rejected any negotiations with Sudan's military leaders, General Abdel Fattah Burhan and General Dagalo. The protest group has called for both men to be tried in court. It will be Zoom on Nigeria after this break. Welcome back. Stories from Nigeria says Naira crunch, cash-strapped Nigerians bank on Apex Court as hearing continues today. as the Apex Court today recommenced hearing on the old Naira note deadline suit between some state governments and the federal government. Nigerians, especially consumers and business groups, as well as professional and trade unions, are looking up to the Supreme Court for a favorable implementing the February 10th deadline for swapping the old Naira notes with new ones, but the Central Bank of Nigeria refused to extend the deadline. The ruling was prior to a suit filed by Zamfara, Kogi and Kaduna state governments against the Attorney General of the Federation on February joined the suit as co-plaintiffs. But the chaos between the governors and the President Major General Muhammadu Buhari over the Naira extending the validity of the old Naira 200 Naira notes while insisting that the old 500 Naira and 1,000 Naira remain free, while urging Nigerians to deposit their old 500 Naira and 1,000 Naira notes with the central bank. The governors of Kaduna, Ogun and Sokoto states insisting on the order of the Apex Court, however, said the people in their states should continue to use the old Naira notes as legal tender until the Supreme Court deliver its final verdict on the case pending. The party on Sunday met with 12 APC governors and in a communique after the meeting admonished that CBN and the Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami, signed new Naira notes across the country. Also, at least 12 states have witnessed protests as a result of the protest of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, across the 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, as sensitive materials arrive ahead of Saturday's elections. And state assembly elections will hold on March 11th. Yesterday, visits at the various offices of the commission showed heavy presence of security operatives in and around the offices. Roads leading to the INEC offices were shut to traffic with Security and Civil Defense Corps, NSCDC and others were seen as strategic locations at the gates and main roads leading to the commission's offices. Commissioners of Police, Benue State Command, Wale Abbas and his Abia State County News. United Kingdom, Jonathan, Archbishop of Canterbury, requests violence-free fair polls. Precisely 3 days to Nigeria's presidential and national assembly elections, they have appealed for free, fair, transparent and peaceful elections. The appeals were contained in separate messages yesterday ahead of the elections coming up on Saturday. The calls came as major socio-political organizations from different parts of the country, Arewa, no Nigerian should be penalized or intimidated for holding an opinion or making a free choice within the confines of the law in the forthcoming elections. They gave the warning in a statement issued at the end of a meeting in Abuja that was as the Nigeria Labour Congress, NLC, safeguard their votes at the polling units. Australia's spy chief cautions of espionage as US-China rivalry heightens. Poses fresh restriction to migrants. Remember, by voting, we add our